Welcome to a new episode of the Cartridge Club, where we discuss our game of the month with members of the Cartridge Club community. It's RocketSauce here, and for the month of February, the Cartridge Club played 2022's Game of the Year, Elden Ring. Joining me on the show, we have Adam, aka Atomic Bomb 1980, Jay Howard 29, and CardboardTier. If you've played along, you can always share your own experiences in the forums at cartridgeclub.org, in our community's Discord, or across social media by using the hashtag Cartridge Club. Before I start the show, on behalf of the entire Cartridge Club community, I'd like to give a huge shout out to our Patreon Club backers like Joe Boyce, Barry Del Mars, Christopher Rohr, Dean Lasagna, and Caleb J. Ross. To our backers and Patreon supporters, thank you. If you're interested in becoming a Patreon supporter for the Cartridge Club, please look at how you can do so at patreon.com/Cartridge Club. Adam, why don't you give us your overall thoughts on the game?
I really enjoyed the game. It's super big. There's so much to do. It's kind of similar to Zelda Breath of the Wild, where you can just have this big world that you can run around and do a bunch of things in it. It just isn't my favorite Souls game. No, but it's definitely very high up there. It's put so many hours in this game. Like just my stream time alone, if I were to go back to my VODs, like 84 hours almost. Just the streaming. That's not counting all the additional time I did level grinding, running around, looking for different things. That's just what I streamed. And now I'm in New Game Plus. And I've been teaming up with you and helping you get through some of those bosses. A lot of time. Overall, I think as far as like thinking about it, I questioned it multiple times of last year of whether I felt that it was Game of the Year worthy. But when I kept thinking more and more about it, of all the games that came out last year, it didn't really have like a ton of competition, and I do think it's definitely worthy as being probably the best game that did come out last year.
Yeah, I mean, where do you start? It's so deep. The lore, the world building, just the enormity of it all. The landmass that you have to traverse and the underground on top of that. It's enormous. Is it my favorite Souls game? Close. It might even be. Bloodborne would be the other one for me. But I really did enjoy a working game. A working game at launch is pretty nice. That's a refreshing. I think we can all agree it's a kind of a refreshing thing to have a working game day one. I don't even remember if there was a day one patch. There might have been, but it wasn't very big. But yeah, it was definitely my game of year. Got to work, came in late, and gave, in my mind, Elden Ring a run for its money, but it was still Elden Ring at the end of the year.
I thought it was fantastic. I don't have a ton of experience with Souls games. I only partially played a few other ones, but I did finish Elden Ring, which was great, and I loved it. I thought that it was a great open world RPG. I think that at some points there were parts of the world that felt like slightly empty. I mean, there were pretty large sections where there wasn't a ton, and then there was other sections where there was just a lot, like really condensed areas with a ton of things to do, which I actually thought was a great contrast. I'm not even really saying that as a negative. I think it gave the game a lot of depth, and as a kind of compare it to other RPGs, because I don't have a ton of Souls experience, and I thought it held up great as an open world RPG. I thought that the bosses were fun. I had to look for the narrative a lot because, again, I'm not used to the Souls experience. So I'm used to more explaining as you go. I'm used to the narrative kind of being fed to you a little bit more simply than it was in Elden Ring. So I kind of struggled to like find the story at points. But even when I struggled with finding the story, I still really enjoyed the combat and the experience and the visuals and all that kind of stuff. So I didn't really mind it so much because I enjoyed everything else. I thought it was a great challenge, and yeah, I really enjoyed it.
I'm gonna say something controversial here. I think it's an okay game. You know, I kept thinking this to myself as I'm playing. I mean, I've beaten Bloodborne, and I've played a little bit of Dark Souls 2. That one I haven't come back to, and I've tried Sakura. And that one lost me right away because of the difficulty. But this one hasn't lost me yet. The only thing I keep thinking back with these FromSoft games is, the one thing I think about as a comparison, and it's not a game. This is just another thing where people absolutely love it or they hate it. It reminds me of IPA beers. People who love them, they're the best thing in the world. They like people can't. It's like a exclusive club where people who drink them think they're the best thing you could ever possibly drink. And if you don't like IPAs, every one of them tastes like trash to you, right? And I say this because I played, I played a few of these games, and I really did like the world of Bloodborne, but man, there was like lots of frustration with that game. The difference is, I guess I prefer more of a linear game, and Elden Ring isn't that. This is very much you can go and do whatever you want, and I know some people like that freedom. Breath of the Wild had that, where you can go anywhere you want, and sometimes you're in the wrong spot that you shouldn't be because you're too underpowered. But I don't know. Maybe FromSoft games or these Soulsborne games aren't for me. I'm not hating when I'm playing with it, but there is definitely. I'll give an example here. So when I started up this game, right, I picked my character. I watched a couple tutorials like, hey, people who have no experience, this is what you should do. And a lot of them recommended say start with the samurai because it's probably the best overall for new people to play the game. So I start with the samurai, right? And I've heard other people say don't go to the south first, go north. It's a lot easier. Don't go to the south first. First, you'll get destroyed. So I don't go south first. I go north, and I get destroyed. So I go. I do some things. I think I'm doing a little bit of progress right here. So I go to this part. I'm kind of stuck. I can't go further north at this point because anytime I go further north, I get stuck. Something kills me. So I'm like, okay, maybe I shouldn't go here. So go northwest, and then I go in these mines, and these little goblins kill me with their little sickle blades. So I'm like, I don't know. This seems even harder. So I was like, I shouldn't go there. I'll go east, and I go east, and I find these easy guys standing around a burning cross, right? People, and a dragon comes down and kills me instantly. I'm like, well, I probably shouldn't be here. I'll go a little bit further south. Okay, there's a lot of these easy guys. All right, cool. I can sneak around and kill them. I'm gonna go down these stairs. All right, there's a treasure chest. I open the treasure chest. It warps me to another world. And and everywhere there is shooting daggers at me. Everything. This one thing is like a porcupine shoots daggers. And I'm like, great. And I can't go back. I am completely stuck here in bone. Okay, then I got out of there. All right, I got out of there by just running out, and I found a tunnel. And then I get out of there, and everywhere outside of this world is poison. Everywhere is just pure poison. And I'm like, boy, well, good thing I found a safe point, like resting point, right? And then I rest. I just had to open up like, what am I doing here? Like what should you do in the first 10 minutes of Bloodborne? I open up like a YouTube video like that. Guy's got his horse going. He's got like a level 4 sword, and I'm like, he's like, oh, you don't even need to kill anything in these first 10 minutes. Just do this. And I'm like, okay. Well, like I kind of text message with my friends who absolutely love this game. And he was telling me, it's like, oh, you're at this location. That's the one area you do not want to be in this game right now, because literally everything will give you poison damage. And I'm like, great. He's like, you just have to run. You're just gonna have to get out of there. If you see something, run. Do not waste your time. Just get out of there or you're going to die. And believe me, I died a lot. I eventually got out of there. And eventually I was able to do this guy's recommended 10-15 minute starter point where I'm like, all right, cool. I can finally get my horse. I can finally get a spell, a summon, and I can level up my sword. Cool. All right. Even after that, though, I'm like, all right, I'm just gonna try to do some easy leveling up here. Nope, still getting bone. I eventually then reached out to Adam, and Adam's like, hey, do you want to do maybe I can help you out here for a little bit. I'll do a co-op with you. I'm like, great, let's do that. So Adam's been great as a guide, helping me through what he's doing. One thing we learned though is it nerfs Adam in his high level when you do a co-op. So if he's coming into my world, he's completely nerfed. He still has a lot of his powers. And I mean, maybe you find this, it's fun to hear, right? It's fun to hear. Not so much fun to play when you put like 6 to 10 hours in of just this basically, and nothing, whatever. I don't know. I just remember I did one thing and I did a lot of that progress and I forgot to level up my guy. So I lost all like my orbs where I could probably could have went up a few more levels. That's why now anytime I kind of look, anytime I get like a couple thousand orbs, I'm like, I think I should level up real quick. I think I should at least, even if it's just one level, I'm just going to do it just to be safe. So that's been my experience. And like I said, it's made me think maybe this is an IPA for me because I'm not a fan of IPAs. I hate IPA beers. I'm more of a cream ale man myself. But I don't know. Like I said, I like it when I'm playing, but I don't see the love. Why it gets so much love from the critics these days. Like I said, I'll give you some more examples right here. There's parts of this game, and it looks like from when they've been coming out since the PS3 that they still look the same. Like the gameplay almost still looks the same, right? And it like seems like it hasn't really evolved so much from it. It almost at points looks like a PS2 game, all right? And Cardboard, you kind of mentioned like, yeah, this game is very, very. What's the kind of word I'm looking for here? Where it doesn't, it doesn't tell you anything, but like even like the narrative is very like you have to seek it out. You have to. Bloodborne is very much the same exact way, where you're in this beautiful haunted world, but like and once you find the narrative like online and when people breaking it down, it's an incredible lore. But why are you hiding it? Like, maybe there's more textbooks that you have to go through, but why would you do that? Why would you you have this beautiful, wonderful story. You hire George R.R. Martin to build out this universe because he's credited as one of the guys, and I've watched an interview him talk about it, where they brought him in here because they said, hey, we want to create some kind of universe that is very much a Tolkien-esque, and he names off a couple other guys who have these wonderful fantasy worlds, and they wanted him to help expand and put some narrative and create into this universe that they had. So it's like, but why would you hide that? But it seems like all Soulsborne games do that. So I don't know. Like I said, there are some beautiful cutscenes in this game, but then it cuts right back to, if you ever talk with NPC in the game, it almost looks like a PS2 game where the people are just there. And they're re-talking to you. And I'm like, this isn't charm to me. I don't know, some people might like this, but this isn't a charm. This very much is like, I understand that they probably put their focus on certain areas of the game, but I don't know. And maybe it's the Western gamer in me, not the, I don't know, I don't know.
Yeah, I'm not a big fan of Japanese RPGs or anything like that myself. But I think what a lot of people like about this game is it doesn't hold your hand at all. It just throws you out to the wolves and say, go about, do great things, but you're going to die a lot. And that's, to me, that's part of the charm. And I don't know if you use like resource sites such as Fextra Life or anything like that, but they generally have a pretty good walkthrough on how to do stuff. My first experience with Elden Ring was very similar to yourself, where you go out, oh, look, a guy on a horse. Let's go attack him and just get smoked, okay, I won't do that again. And I love the hidden stuff. The lore isn't shoved down your throat. If you want to find it, it's right there in the items. It's right there in the NPCs. Although it is hidden, you have to kind of put the pieces together. And if there's a a section that you just don't get, I always go to like YouTube and watch Vadi videos, lore videos. It's fantastic how he can, pull like a lore string out of something so small. He's pretty impressive as far as his lore, I guess, interpretations.
I'm going to drop another name that's also very impressive too. His name is Epic Name Bro. He streams as well, but he has started doing the lore for the Souls games early on, to the point to where FromSoft had him help write a few of the walkthroughs. So he's been involved with From Software. So he digs deep into the lore. I've watched his videos on YouTube for a long time before I ever realized he's actually a streamer too. But he would go through, find an item, and he would read through all of the dialogue and all of the text of each item. And then he would start piecing together the lore for you and telling you this story, this world. And I think the game doesn't give you a ton of cinematics because it's kind of like how we are now currently as a civilization. We are still just, when we go to Egypt or wherever we go, we are literally just piecing stuff together. I think that is maybe the idea, is that you don't know until you start piecing stuff together, and that's maybe the joy. Like Cardboard J, you might interpret something differently in the text than what I would. So I might believe something different than what you believe until we start piecing things together and be like, wait, no, maybe you're right. I see where you get that idea. So I think that is kind of the point of the Souls games, because it's in all of the Souls games.
Yeah, I think that's a pretty good point. So something I kind of thought of, I don't know, most of the way through the game. So also when I played as a mage, just because I had very limited Souls experience, but all of it that I've seen has always been melee combat. So I started the game and I was like, oh, magic sounds like a lot of fun. And it completely changes the way you play the game. First off, I've watched people that are like me, that are unfamiliar with Souls games and that are playing melee, and it's like a totally different experience. So that's one thing. Another thing, I play games completely blind. I streamed all of Elden Ring. I streamed, like, I say all of it. There was a couple of bosses I didn't find, and a decent bit of like late game stuff I didn't do, because I try to do everything as blind as possible. I didn't look at any lore videos. I avoided streams, which was very difficult to do for a long time with Elden Ring. But so there was a lot of things that I missed. But I tried to be as thorough as possible. I streamed like 150 hours of it. So anyway, I feel like when they're telling the narrative, and Atomic, I think that what you said kind of makes a lot of sense too in this scope. The characters that are talking to the main character, it's not like they're talking to us, the players. They're talking to that person in the game that has lived in this world, if that makes sense. Like, I feel like a lot of RPGs, they're talking to Cardboard or Jay or Sauce or Atomic, and they're explaining, what's happening, or they're telling a story. A lot of the NPCs in Elden Ring, it's like they're talking to the Tarnished that has lived in this world, that's from this world, that already has like a lot of background knowledge. And you kind of have to like dig and find that background knowledge as you go. And it's not easy to do if you're kind of unfamiliar with how they tell the stories. So anyway, I think that's, just a...
Like Cardboard, I streamed probably north of 150 hours of Elden Ring, and just just trying to stay away. I like you. I went through it blind. I talked with a friend, and we'd go through it kind of in similar pace, and we'd discuss what we did. But yeah, I mean, it was crazy how much Elden Ring content there was. I mean, it was so big that Dr. Disrespect was streaming Elden Ring, and it was tough to like not watch his streams because he was just mind blown by this world and all the things you could do. But yeah, I tried to get through it blind as I could as well.
So, Jay, something you mentioned that you said was pretty incredible, that you don't think there was a day one patch. I do remember some of the next gen consoles like your PS5 and Xbox didn't quite run the best on the first, and it was recommended that the best version on launch was PS4. That's one thing I clearly remember, that people were saying, if you're gonna play it, if you're gonna play on PS5, run the PS4 version at launch, because it runs the smoothest out of all versions. But you're right, that's kind of like one of the things about FromSoft games, like unless you're playing on a very high-end PC, it's almost, I think I even remember, like Bloodborne I think runs at 30 frames per second, and people are still like begging for a 60 frames version to come out. I have suspicions is the word I'm looking for. I have suspicions that there's going to be a remaster at some point of that game. But yeah, it's kind of known that, like, with I always call it Soccer Hero, but Sekiro, there's always kind of with Sekiro that on launch it ran terrible on like PS4 and Xbox One, and eventually I think it got a next gen where they unlocked the frame rate, so like it just runs smooth, like at 60 frames per second if you play it on the next gen consoles. It's just kind of like, it's like how Bethesda games are almost always known for being super buggy at launch, and then you give it time, it gets patched, and then you got a playable game.
I remember, now you mentioned that, I remember that, but I never experienced anything negative on my copy. I mean, from the time I put it in, and that was like an hour after launch, it ran smooth for me. I didn't run into any glitches or anything, any performance issues. I thought it was pretty smooth.
Same. I didn't have any issues, but I also bought the PS4 version, and played that on my PS4 Pro, and that's what I played through. I had no problems. I don't even recall the game crashing. Maybe it did. I don't remember, but I don't recall any issues, like, at all. No bugs, no freezing, nothing.
I remember hearing people playing it on Steam right at launch that had issues. I remember a few people that played it on PC right at launch that had some issues, but I think it was fixed pretty quickly.
You know what's pretty interesting? It's like I think it's only been like 2 patches for this too. And by that, if you look at, and I'm saying this because I know when I launched the PS5 version, I think it's like 1.0.8 is the version. I think there was only like 1.0.7 and then 1.0.8 for patches, and then it's still like the same game basically. Because I keep seeing people. I mean, you search up like how-tos right now on Elden Ring. At least I have been like, hey, what are some good pointers, kind of thing. So I could keep getting all these like recommended watches now that are like quick way to get 1,000,000 orbs or something like that within the first beginning part of the game, and like it was put up 2 days ago. So like this game hasn't been patched to take away glitches that people have found to manipulate the orbs so you can do stuff. So like I said, I don't think they plan. It's not like one game's like build 3.0 or 2.0 that games constantly getting patched for little things here and there. It's pretty much, I think, a done game until that newly announced DLC just got announced today comes out. Did anyone say anything? Did they ever say when that's coming out? Was it this year or just announced that it's coming out? Right?
No. So like their mech game will be out before this before this DLC comes out. Is what I'm hearing. So
I didn't hear anything about the mech game. Are they just remastering the old game that they're from? So are they doing a completely new? I think it's
a new Armored Core game. Yeah,
new Armored Core.
Mm-hmm.
Because they did an older one back on the PlayStation 3. They
I
did
think it
one
was
of them.
Xbox. I think original Xbox, right? I think it's like
So,
it's like one of their first games. Too.
so it goes all clear back to PS1. Armored Core is kind of like it's kind of like their passion project, I think, more than anything. They're known for their Souls games, but they put out tons of Armored Core titles. I think, what are they on, like 6 or 7 right now?
I think the
Yeah,
new
but
one
I don't think
6.
FromSoft did all of them. I don't think FromSoft did all the Armored Core games. And I think in honestly, Demon Souls was the biggest like Souls game that came out. That was like the first thing, but they actually had a franchise prior to that was a more kind of sort of their Kickstarter of Souls, and it was called Kingsfield. And there were 4 of those. That was really their first actual Souls-ish game before doing Demon Souls. But they've done a few JRPGs too. I have a game called Lost Kingdoms 1 and 2 on the GameCube that From Software did. And that's like a card-based, turn-based JRPG. And that was also theirs.
You know, one thing else about like, and I remember this going back to Demon Souls on the PS3 when that was kind of coming out. And I just want to know if you guys kind of agree with this. I just remember the discussion kind of was, hey, this is something different. It reminds me a lot of an NES game. By that, I mean the NES difficulty being just brutal. I heard that, and I heard like Zelda. And by that, not by like the 3D Zeldas, more along the line of like the NES Zeldas was the bigger comparison for this game. At least the original one with Demon Souls. But I know it's kind of carried forward with the Dark Souls franchises as well. Would you agree that's a good comparison for this?
I would say yes, actually, because you think about going back and playing like Oracle of Ages and Seasons. Neither of those games held your hand or told you where to go. That's very similar to what you get out of the Souls games. Here's a big world. You go in through these areas, you find these weapons, and you take down a boss. That's what Zelda is known for. So I see the big comparisons in Zelda a lot. Even when I'm streaming, if I can't find anyone playing the Zelda game that I'm playing, I will raid into a Souls game. Or vice versa. If I'm playing a Souls game and I see someone playing a Zelda game that I think is probably closer to a Souls game, I will raid into it if I don't find anyone new. Like I kind of go put those games hand in hand. I'm not saying they're exactly the same. I think they're influenced by each other. Especially, I think Dark Souls 1, I think, is influenced by Twilight Princess. Especially when you got the Wolf Link. One of the bosses you fight is a wolf with a sword. Like,
I think they even said, like, I think I saw, this is a Mighty Keith video. I think one of them actually looks like Ganon from Ocarina of Time. And it's an Elden Ring. He's got like the 2 blades. I think even like the pig nose. I would have to look it up. Granted, there is... After looking at that, what's the website that you talked about, Jay? Because I looked at that and you saw the boss list, that they're like the optional boss list in the game.
Yeah, so like I mean, Elden Ring has over 100 bosses in the world. I mean, and the resource is Extra Life.
Yeah, so I don't think I've seen that one yet, but I saw it at least in the Mighty Keith video talking about Elden Ring, which.
This will bring me to a certain point, though, for all the bosses, though. I do appreciate that all the bosses are there, but but a lot of those bosses are also recycled bosses you had already fought. That is one of my gripes I would have with this game, I guess, because I'm like, I've fought like the same boss multiple times. He might have like a slight change in his name, but it's the same exact boss.
So
I think,
yeah. I'm sorry. That's one of my gripes too. Is actually the reuse of resources and stuff like that in a game like that. But another one of my gripes was, you go from Bloodborne, where you have a lot of like trick weapons, to Sekiro where you have none, and then you go to Elden Ring and you only have like maybe a couple. So I really liked the trick weapons in Bloodborne. I don't know if you guys enjoyed using those, but I wish Elden Ring had something similar to that.
By trick weapons, do you mean like the advantage where you can turn one weapon into the other? As an example, you'll have an axe, but if you press like R1, it turns into a much longer extended axe where it's longer. It's like it's with a shorter axe, it's got a quicker, hack, right? But it's got
Right.
less power. But when you turn it into an extended axe, it does more damage, but it takes longer to swing, right?
You got it. Yep.
Okay.
Where you can have you can have diversity in your combos and how
Sure.
you approach. It's I'm kind of glad that my bleed build is still legit. It's been legit since day one.
Bleed build strong.
Well, how about we all talk about it's a good, I guess, a good transition here. How do you build your guys? Like, well, first off, what class did you start off with? And then, like, because there's many different ways, and I think I've read too at later on, it doesn't quite matter how you do it. I know there's probably a like superior build for a samurai or something like that. Because believe me, I've seen the videos recommended tips for building a samurai, but I've also read it doesn't matter after a certain point in time. You can play it any way you want to. But for the sake of discussion here, what was your class that you started with, and how did you build them out?
I started with I punish myself in the Souls games. I never use magic, and I always just use a great sword. And a lot of times, I don't even wear armor. I just go in because the quicker I can dodge, I'd rather quickly dodge attacks than having this heavy armor on that feels like I'm a sack of rocks tipping over and trying to dodge because I'm still going to take the hit. If I'm slow, I'm going to take that hit. I'd rather be able to quickly get away and not take a hit whatsoever and time their swings and dodge in between. I started getting really, really good at that. And I also don't wear armor because you're quicker too, and your stamina jumps back up the second you stop. But like if you're like going to a boss or trying to get through some areas, you can just quickly like weave around different enemies if you already fought them like 100,000 times trying to get to the boss and you just want to get back to the boss, you could just quickly get around without any of the armor. But you have to take the hit of, you're going to take a lot more damage. But yeah, I start with Knight, and you were saying that it doesn't matter later on. I would say for the most part, you are correct. It's because you can build your character the way you want to build your character and to fit your play style. So if you want more strength, you want more vitality, you want more, that's where it doesn't matter, because when you pick your class, a few of those stats are just skewed back and forth, but you build it how you want and what you find is the most important. So later on in the game, all those original stats don't matter because you're building to what's been working for you.
Yeah, I agree with Atomic there. Your starting class doesn't really matter in the big scheme of things, in that you're going to build it to how you want to build it later in the game. For me, it was after my first run, I was like, oh, I kind of like Rivers of Blood. So I think I'm going to gear my build towards that bleed, that agility, and endurance. And like Atomic, no one likes a fat roller. No one wants to fat roll. Okay, so as you just plop on the ground and you slowly roll over, and yeah, that's just. I mean, if you're looking to be a good parry build, then maybe you go high in like armor. But I mean, I'm with Atomic there. You want to be able to get in and get out.
Yeah, the heavy roll is just so hard to watch. It's so slow. So yeah, I'd like to play the mini game of Fashion Souls inside Elden Ring. I loved all the different armor sets, and I loved like just every like couple hours I'd be like, I want to look a little different. So I was always changing my armor and stuff like that. And I didn't even really realize this until like a good chunk of the game in how little armor matters. Like it's so different, comparing the weapons to armor. Like obviously the weapon you choose changes your game style completely. The armor like barely matters for like actually surviving and fighting these bosses, So I try to stick to the medium. There's a light, medium, and heavy. I try to stick to the medium role. And I think it worked pretty well for my play style. But I started as the astrologer, I think, and like I said, I'd stayed pretty mage heavy the entire way through. There was so pretty early on, I did the game in the wrong order to start off with, like pretty heavily. Like I was definitely going to the wrong places, but because I was playing as a mage, like it was kind of okay. Just having like a high amount of range in that game completely changes things. It kind of trivializes some things and does make some things harder. I mean, there were some bosses that I heard most people one shot that I struggled with because they're really resistant to magic, and most people with their great swords were able to like 3-shot them. So it definitely does change the experience a lot. For the first good bit of the game, I also was basically just going around where to find new spells, and I didn't know. So I played like the first like 20 or 30 hours with literally just 2 spells. And it was like I was kind of like, are there more than 2 spells in this game? And it turns out there are hundreds. I was just I was not going in the right places. There was even a boss fight that I died to a few times and then left, and I found out if I would have just killed that boss and walked in, it's like where you find like the first mage lady, and she had like a ton of them. And I turned around and didn't go back for like another 10 hours. So yeah, I enjoyed the astrologer. I went pretty heavy intelligence. And then I realized that dexterity also increased the speed of spells. So I started to throw a little bit of dexterity in there. And then about halfway through the game or so, I found a couple of intelligence scaling melee weapons. And that totally changed the way I started playing. So also being full range the entire time in that game, I started to feel, I mean, I don't know, it makes things like really repetitive, because sometimes you're killing bosses before you even really have a chance to see their kit, which sounds, ooh, look at how strong I am. But it's 100% true. Or, they interact the same way a lot of times when you're playing a range character. So I was kind of wanting to try something a little bit more melee heavy, but I was really enjoying the character. So once I found intelligence scaling melee weapons, I was like, oh, this is awesome. So I started carrying like a staff and a sword, and it kind of changed the way I played for sure. I think that's pretty interesting too. You can find a weapon that you like. You might like the look of it, or it might sound cool, and you might try it, and it'll completely change the way you're playing. It will completely change your play style. And I thought that was really cool that there was all this variety, and I would just find a weapon that completely changed the way I played it this way for 50 hours, and then I found this really cool intelligence katana. And it, completely changed the way I played.
So did you stick with the whole still magic astrologer build the whole way through, where at the end you still don't think that? Okay.
Yeah.
I'm just generally curious because shout out, the Cartridge Club's been playing Souls games since season 1. I believe in the first season they did Dark Souls 2 because it came out like right then, and the bros who are the hosts love the games. So I mean, we've played Bloodborne on here as well too. I always hear it and rings in the back of my head. So shout out to Mark, aka Cartridge Bros P2. He always says, and I remember the main reason why he could not get in the Bloodborne was because there was no sword and board option. That's his go-to way of playing those games. He says, I want swords and boards. That's it. So I actually really did like Bloodborne. I definitely needed some hand holding in the fact that I needed to be showed what to do, what I was not doing, right? I eventually was able to learn the stun with the gun. I got very good at like even stunning and like, I guess wherever the devastation move that goes and kind of rip out a good chunk of their health. I got really good at that in Bloodborne. I really wish, and if I'm wrong, please tell me. But I really wish there was, and I know because I didn't see any guns options in it at all. If there was a way to play this game like Bloodborne, I probably would have done that as my build. That I would have loved to have the stun gun option and like an attack weapon for my right hand. I say that because I tried the boards and swords. That don't work for me. I don't know. I mean, I've tried the parry. It worked great in the tutorial when I'm going against like brainless dead zombies, right? I'm like, all right, this isn't too bad. Okay, but swords and boards don't work for me. Where I started my build off as a samurai, And I eventually found out. I originally was trying to, after talking with one buddy, he was telling me, "Man, get 2 swords and just go in there like a tank. Just go in there with like 2 swords attacking." And I found the path. I found me a second sword in some cave, and I got the hell out of there. And I was like, "All right, I'm gonna rock 2 swords in here." Doesn't work so well for me. I eventually found out you're better off, with your stronger sword, probably just one sword, double handing that one sword, and it does more damage. And since then, I've been playing that way, and I kind of agree with that. That at least for me at this point, having one sword that's like a level 4, and then having a sword that's like a level 1 in the other hand ain't working at the time. I know you guys mentioned it, but like, how did you continue out your build? Like, Jay, how did you continue out your build? What you said, you mentioned you did a bleed build, right?
Yeah, so I did a bleed build. I've got Millennia's sword in my left, and then the Rivers of Blood in my right. I am a 2 sword guy. I go in there and I strike a couple of times, maybe do a couple of combos, and then I bounce out. That's generally my play style. I couldn't do a magic build just because you're flinging a couple spells and then you're just kind of kiting them around the room. It's like, yeah, that doesn't seem too exciting. And I've seen too many YouTube videos where they just one shot a boss after they take 15 minutes of buffs and everything like that. It's like, I don't want to do that. So
the Harry Potter build.
Yeah, the Harry Potter.
Kamehameha. Dead.
But no, I did when I built my character, I focused on 3, maybe 4 stats, and I went into it originally thinking I was going to be a strength build, just kind of bash bad boy, and then win. And that worked fine for a while, but I kind of like Atomic's play style, where less armor is better. So I went with the dexterity, agility, bleed build. And I didn't know at the time that was probably the one of the more overpowered builds in the game. And every time I watch a PvP, it's like, oh, they're bashing on the bleed builds. But yeah, that's where I went, and that's where I stayed.
Yeah, when you play through the game blind and you stumble upon something that's really strong, people will still give you crap about it, and you're like, I didn't look up like the strongest build. I just thought this would be fun. Sorry, it's really good, but I'm gonna keep doing it. I'm having a good time. Yeah.
Well, for the longest time, I was rocking Radon's, knives. I guess they're daggers. They're like 2 great swords.
Those look sick
in the game. But I mean, yeah, going back to like fashion souls, I that was probably one of the coolest weapons I had. But and I used them for quite a while. But I went to katanas and went to the bleed build because to me it was just chewing up bosses super fast.
Yeah, I will say early on, eventually I got better at dodging, but not being super familiar with Souls games and starting it as a range character, I was terrible at dodge rolling, which is like probably the most important part of the Souls experience. So you mentioned shields earlier. I used the shield for like a lot of the game, especially earlier on. Once I got better at dodging, but I tended, to use it a little bit less and did the staff and sword. But for a while, I did staff and shield, and that really started as soon as I found a shield that had 100% physical negation. I used it a lot, and I mean, I would literally on bosses, there would be certain combos where I knew there was a high chance that I was going to screw up the dodge roll, so I would just block it. And I did that for the first several bosses, and it worked. It was fine. I mean, there was certain attacks I knew I could dodge, and then I knew if there was a high chance I was gonna miss the roll, I would dodge it. I take the pretty big stamina hit, but I would just back up and continue casting spells. So the shield, I think combos with the staff really well, and it kind of covered my handicap for not being able to dodge roll for like a lot of the game. And yeah, I enjoyed it. It was fun.
I've never been good at parrying. Parrying was always tough.
Yeah, parrying's hard. Yeah, I wouldn't really parry. I wouldn't really time it very well. I would literally just hold the block button for like a full 2 seconds before the attack came out. No shame. I'm like, well, I 100% physical negation. I took no HP. No problem.
when it comes to parrying Sekiro, I actually was pretty good at like parrying in Sekiro. It's the only Souls game I can parry in. I cannot parry in any of the others. So,
Bloodborne, I was really good at parrying, but I couldn't do everything.
That.
Yeah, parrying in Elden Ring is hard. It is not easy.
But like my build is based off my previous experiences with like Dark Souls and Demon Souls. Unfortunately, there was no real great sword in Demon Souls. That was more so brought into Dark Souls. So in Demon Souls, I was more like sword shield, like Link, basically. And then I kind of still will use that in Dark Souls depending on the boss. If the boss is attacking quickly and I need to attack quickly back, I will switch from my great sword to another sword just on the fly, just if I need to. But one of the things I loved about the great sword is I will use my great sword and a shield. I like to block because I dodge roll a lot and I make sure I can dodge quickly. But if a hit's coming and I know I can't move that, like Cardboard says, you can't get off that and you're going to take that hit either way, then block. Just hold and block. Take that. You'll take a stamina hit. You might lose a little bit of health, but it's worth it than trying to like dodge roll and take the big hit. But one of the things I loved about the great sword is I can also switch out my thing and I can throw the shield on my back. And then with a great sword like the Zweihander or something, you can just hold, you can block and hold with the sword. You take a little bit more damage than you would if you used the shield, but you can still fight that way and still survive.
I think bosses might be a good discussion. If you guys have any ones that you guys remember that stand out to you guys, because I don't have many. I literally have like 2. And what's it called? So I'm gonna rely on you guys right here. Like I could either talk about Godric myself, or the guy who was before him that you fight on the bridge. I can't remember what his name was. Margot.
Yeah.
I could talk about Margot because I did him by myself and I was proud of how I did him. So.
Nice.
I'll talk about Margot.
Normally, Margot's like the gatekeeper. It was for a lot of people. He was the gatekeeper of the game. I mean, people either got past him and continued on, or threw their hands up in frustration and threw the disc out.
Well, yes, when the game came out, I saw a lot of streamers stuck on that fight for a very, very long time. It was entertaining and definitely a challenging fight. Yeah, it's just definitely a challenging fight. I think my favorite fight in this game, and I want to say probably even out of all the Souls, is the one and only Millennia. That fight is, I think, one of the most fair fights, one of the most challenging fights, and one of the most rewarding fights when you actually defeat her, because she's challenging. I fought some bosses that were just, the hitboxes seemed a bit weird or a bit off. Her fight seemed completely fair. She tore you apart, but you had to defend yourself. But she was probably one of my favorite fights.
Jay, you disagree?
Fair. Fair. Healing every time she hits you. That's wow. No. She is my favorite. She's my most memorable fight, but not because she was fair. I thought that after 50 times of dying on the first phase, I tried to do it myself. I couldn't. I'd get her down, and then all of a sudden she'd lay a hit and heal like a quarter of her health bar, and it's like, yeah, I don't know. But she was my favorite fight. And definitely the most rewarding. I agree with you as far as reward goes in the Soul series, because I mean, it felt like you were beating your head against a brick wall when fighting her. I'm not kidding you. It took me 50 times just to get past the first health bar, and then it took me another 30 times, probably the second phase. It was a tough fight for me, but I definitely threw my hands up and triumphed when I did get her finally.
Yeah, the thing is I tried to fight every single boss by myself, and I did most of them by myself. But when I got to her, I got to a point where I literally actually summoned in co-op to actually beat her my first time. just because she was that hard. And I say fair, and she does do that to you. It's kind of like, is it fair that you cast Scarlet Rot on her then? In a sense, it's the same. I think it goes hand in hand because it's almost like you're basically fighting another like player. That's why I say it's fair, because it's hand in hand, and she's going to tear you apart, but you got to defend yourself.
So I didn't summon help for her because when you do, you're basically giving her free hit points. the computer helper is just basically a health point pool for her, because he or she never dodges, never blocks, and she's just getting free hit points off of that computer.
That wasn't the help I'm talking about. I summoned in co-op players, like other actual players.
Oh, okay, actual players. Okay.
I avoided bringing in any other like random people to join me and play until I got to that fight, and then I fought her so many times, and I'm just like, I just want to beat her because I want to move on. But I do promise I want to go back and fight her without it. But yeah, I know, like I was using like the summons, and she was getting free health. It was ridiculous. So I'm just like, no, I'm bringing in, like, I brought in 2 other actual players, and we downed it. But she's actually hard to co-op too.
Yeah.
Especially if you're the one helping, because I wanted to get good at that fight. So I went in to try to help other people. But the problem is a lot of times when you help other people, you don't communicate. And a lot of times the host tries to be the main one hitting.
Right.
The second the host dies, you're out. You're done.
Exactly.
So it's almost like back off, let the help do most of the work, finish her off if you need to. We're here to help you, but don't jump in there and die in 2 seconds when we just came in to help you.
Another boss that I really liked was Malekith.
Oh, Malekith is super awesome.
Malekith was super cool. Yeah.
Yeah, that was a close second for me.
And another one I want to throw up there too. And actually, Sauce and I just fought Loretta. That is probably, she has become one of my nemesis fights, because trying to fight her, bouncing around on the horse and constantly throwing magic at you, she is a very, very difficult fight. She's a little easier the first time you fight her. The second time you fight her, she is going to wreck your face repeatedly.
Yeah, she has one of my favorite attacks, that magic bow. Isn't that Loretta?
Oh, yeah, that destroys you.
It looks so cool. I remember being so excited when I got that, because it's an intelligence scaling range spell, and I was like, man, I'm going to use the hell out of this. I didn't really use it that much because I had other things that did more damage. But I still used it like a little bit for like fight openers, because I just thought it looked so cool. I was like, man, that is such a badass spell. I remember the Rykard fight a lot. It's kind of turned into one of my favorite memes together. I just love it so much. And I loved the look of that fight. It was great.
The Rykard fight, I think every Souls game has like a gimmick fight. For Demon Souls, it was that flying mana ray, and I think Elden Ring, the Rykard was. I remember that fight, and it was pretty. I went in there without the required piece of equipment, and I was getting deep in the fight. I almost beat him without the spell or whatever. I was so frustrated.
I did the same thing. And also when I did eventually use that required piece of equipment, it doesn't scale with intelligence. Spoiler alert. So it was not the easiest mage fight. It took me like a little while, and then I found out that's one that normally a lot of people have breezed through. I did not. That was not a breeze through for me. Nothing about the gimmick scales with a mage build. So I ended up actually using a piece of advice from chat, which I like almost never did in that game. They told me to just go and upgrade that piece of equipment several times, and after I did that, it was much easier. It like doubled the amount of damage it did. So that's kind of how I got through it. But I, the cutscene in the middle of that fight, and even like the end, it was very memorable for me. I was just like in awe. I was like, this is so badass. I liked it. I liked it a lot.
What do we think about the Radigan fight? That fight was really awesome. And I think it was Radigan.
Yeah,
I
that
saw an
was
article
cool.
that Radigan was listed as the best memorable fight, which I can see that, but I still disagree. And I think Millennia is probably the most memorable
I
fight.
mean,
But
the fighting area is like the size of an entire zone. Like it's so grandiose. Yeah, I mean, it's definitely memorable. I could see why it's ranked up there. I don't know if it's that high for me. I mean, it's definitely up there. It was a lot of fun. It was very memorable. But yeah,
him riding that ridiculous little tiny horse, and then whenever he gets to the next phase, he goes up into the sky and comes down like all like superhero style and just crashes down.
yeah.
Well, I mean, how many times did you die from that bow just running up to the fight? Probably 10 times, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm. Yeah, he was cool. I also like the Astel, the natural born fight. I thought that one was a lot of fun. Again, real big, majestic looking enemy. I remember that one a lot. I thought it was really cool. I also used the Astel. I forget the name of it, but that boss is what the Astel blade. It has it's a ranged melee attack. Its heavy attack is like a ranged melee. It's intelligence scaling. I use that weapon a lot. So that's maybe why I remember a little bit more. But yeah, that one was a lot of fun. The natural born fight.
What would you say is your least favorite fight? Not necessarily because of difficulty, just by maybe even just the mechanics or whatever. For me, I would say the fire giant. I hated that fight because there were so many times that it felt like clipping was off. This is where I was talking about clipping and hitboxes, because there are times to where like he would like move like that big cylinder thing that he would hit and like go through, and there are times I could roll through it, but then there's other times it would hit me. So it felt like that fight was just very, very off. I think if they do more patches, they need to kind of fix a little bit of that fight. But it was also just not fun to play against the fire giant. And again, I got to the point where I was just like, screw this, brought in more co-op actual players, beat them, and moved on. There's only a few bosses in the entire game that I actually brought in other players against. He was one of the others, just because I kept getting frustrated on just how weirdly that fight was. Cardboard, you did range, so for you, if you fought the fire giant, probably wasn't as difficult. But for me, I had to
run away and cast spells. What's the problem?
But I was up close and personal, running around under the legs. Like all I seen, like with camera angles, and all I see on my big screen was like a leg. Like it was so much harder to fight my play style with.
Yeah.
With that.
Oh yeah. I could see that for sure. Yeah.
From a melee perspective, I really didn't have a problem fighting him, but the camera was the killer on that one for me, just because you didn't know where he was looking, where he was going. You were just so disoriented with everything. The fight I didn't like the most was probably Renala. It was so easy. To me, it just seemed like we really didn't even need to fight her. I mean, it was more of just another boss. They just, we're gonna have you fight her, but she's not gonna be terribly hard.
I think I got the fire giant down in 3 attempts, and Renala took me probably 15. The one that you just mentioned, because she's a mage and she is hella resistant to spells. And the second phase got me several times. It was not really that easy taking down the Queen of Magic using spells.
Oh wow, yeah, I didn't even think about that. That your build might make you a little more susceptible to her.
Yeah, it was much harder to fight her as an intelligent build. So I did a partial second playthrough of Elden Ring as a full strength, a little bit of faith, and I probably haven't got halfway through, but I did get through Renala, and I one-shot it as a strength build. I mean, it was so I definitely see what you mean, but as a first playthrough, full intelligence, it was not that easy. She's a boss that, yeah, you definitely just getting toe to toe with her and smacking her with the sword is 100% the way to go. Like staying way back, all of her spells were harder to dodge. Like I said, she doesn't take that much magic damage. All of her summons were really hard for me to deal with. Like the 5 wolves as a squishy mage with all range was not that easy, So it was a kind of an interesting contrast there. Yeah.
And what the hell was that kid doing to your foot at the very beginning? I mean, you look down and there's that kid, and it's like, what the heck?
Hey, at least the Renala fight, though, that first phase, the music is pretty awesome. Like the music and ambiance, I think of that fight is pretty cool. But you're right. I think for the most part, it's kind of it's kind of a blip.
Yeah, I mean, really. As a melee character, I burned through her really fast.
Yeah,
I was like, well, okay.
Yeah,
I did too. I think I beat her like second or third attempt, somewhere around there.
Yeah. The Godskin duo. How did you guys fare against that fight? That was special.
Adam, you want to go first on that one?
I'll say this special. I still beat them, and it didn't take me too many attempts. But when the big one starts rolling, that was just such a weird. It's probably definitely one of the weirdest Souls fights that I've ever had.
Mm-hmm.
And it's just, I don't know. It was just so weird.
Yeah, for me, the Godskin duo wasn't very hard. I think I got them in like 2 or 3 tries, but it was definitely one of those focus fire on something and get them down fast. So you just have to deal with one.
It's probably the most carried I felt by the ashes. Like the ashes summons. Like I had a couple attempts that didn't go so well, and then the attempt that I did beat it, neither of them looked at me like the entire time, and I was like, oh man, I just got hella carried by these ashes running around.
Oh, that's that was something that the game nerfed, was the ash.
Oh yeah,
was what was it, the one where you summon the double of yourself?
Oh yeah, the mimic one.
Yeah, the mimic, where it had everything that you had, and it was like using it super efficiently. Yeah, you're right. It helped to have that mimic kind of, draw attention.
I did not use the mimic ashes too much. I think with that one, I don't remember the names of all the ashes, but I tended to use the ashes that had like 3, 4, or 5 summons to, as much distraction as possible. And I think I used one of those on that, but I had it leveled up a good bit and they were pretty tanky. So again, as a mage build, it gave me plenty of time to just melt them down. But I remember when I beat it, I was like, man, I bet this would be so much harder, a couple different ways. Like I felt pretty lucky when I did beat them. So, but yeah, I thought that one was a cool one too.
It's funny that you mentioned, Jay, that Marga is the one that people get stuck on. Well, I said like that. I beat him on my second playthrough of it. The first time I just try to see like what was I in store for here, right? And then I think he beat me with like 2 swipes, right? And then I was like, oh yeah, I just got those summons, the wolves. Why don't I try that? And then basically he was completely distracted by that. Where I'm like, okay, and then I just allow me the opportunity to keep stabbing him in the back the entire time, and then if he turned around, I run away. I run away, and then the dogs would get him again, and then I go same thing. But I literally beat him on the second playthrough. I was like, all right, if this is, Elden Ring, here I am. Pound my chest, puff it out a little bit. But Adam, I remember playing Godric with you, and I just remember that was a lot. I mean, up into that second phase, that was that was a fun fight in that second phase where he rips out the dragon head and puts it on his arm. I mean, I guess his abilities come from all the arms that he adds to himself, but he's got that little whirlwind attack and the flame attack. Anytime where like the fire takes up like the whole stage, basically, you have to run really far away. The shield didn't do much protection from that, basically, but Adam was very much my distraction piece. He was my summon in that time there for helping me out on that one.
he was a hard fight, and when I was playing by myself, he was definitely one of the harder fights I had. I fought him numerous times before I eventually got through. Although I tried to fight him most of that time without armor, and he was one of the ones I got to a point where I did put armor on to fight him. Because I mean, I was running around in my undies and fighting him. That's what I mean by no armor. Like I just literally run around in my character's undies and just fight. And I took down a lot of bosses like that, even beating them first time. And he was definitely one of the most challenging ones, I think, in that aspect. But at that time, since he's an earlier boss, I also was under leveled, and I again wasn't focusing on leveling up highly. So, but yeah, he's definitely was a fun fight.
Well, I still remember though at the end of that part, the guy you see at the very front of the castle at the very end is kicking him in the head at the very his corpse at the very end of the.
That interaction was very funny. Just yeah. That guy was very funny. Yeah, Godric was one that I attempted before I found any additional spells. And I attempted him probably 15 to 20 times with just the 2 starting astrologer spells. I basically beelined to Stormveil Castle because that's what I thought I was supposed to do. And then after failing there for like I said, probably about 20 tries, that's when I was like, okay, I have to go somewhere else. And I found the Weeping Peninsula and did a bunch of other stuff. And then when I went back to him, I think I got him in 1 or 2. But it was also, I had seen the fight 20 times. So I was pretty familiar. But after, building my kit and having several different spells at my disposal and leveling up several times, it was a little bit easier. But the first time I got to Godric, he whooped my ass for a good while. That was the first time, I managed to get Margit down pretty quickly. Some of the little mini bosses around Stormveil Castle fairly well. And then he was like the first boss where I was like, okay, I have to relocate. Everything else I was able to kind of push my way through. And then when I got there after enough tries, I was like, okay, I have to go find something else. And that was like the first time I did that. And then that's when I kind of found out how rewarding the exploration was. And I kept finding just so many things. And then after that, I was a little bit more comfortable after, if I failed at a boss 5-10 times, I was like, all right, I'll just come back and try this again later. Sometimes you get real determined and you're like, no, I will get this down. But that was kind of the first time I was like, all right, well, I don't think I'm supposed to be here yet. I need to go find something else to do. And it was much easier when I came back.
That's one of the things that I'm going to give some credit to new players to Souls games for Elden Ring is that you get the option to do that and come back later. Whereas some of the other Souls games
true.
are a little bit more linear. You either beat that boss or you don't really move on, really. Yeah. So you have to then just go back and level grind until you can then just beat that boss and then move forward.
Yeah, in Elden Ring, you have a bit more options. Yeah, the other ones, it seems like you either give up or get good. Those are your only options.
Yes.
In Elden Ring, you can screw off somewhere else and, generally, find a lot more resources and maybe a couple more flask charges and, other things. Also, you don't really feel like you have to grind runes as much in Elden Ring because, generally if you explore a lot, you get enough to level up. So it's not stopping in one place and farming forever, which in my limited experience in other Souls games, I had to do that a good bit because I wasn't very good at them. But in Elden Ring, I didn't have to stop and grind in one area because just through exploring, I generally found enough to level up a good bit,
So basically, the way you leveled up was just collecting all the orbs from like the skulls and I guess essentially the soul, the souls you've taken basically, and you cashed them in when you wanted to level up.
Exactly. Yeah. And I would try to, section off pieces of the map and explore this area fully and do like a grid and try to find everything before moving on. And then once I started doing that, I was just racking in levels. So when I actually went to progress with bosses, I was at an appropriate level. I didn't have to just stop in one place and kill these same mobs for hours.
Boy, I remember. It gives you a little glimmer in your map on the unexplored area where the map is located for that area. I remember beelining it. I didn't even stop to find anything. I just beelined it right for the map just so that I can unlock that that portion of the map, so I could see where the heck it was I was going.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I remember doing the same thing in a couple of sections, and I didn't realize I found those pieces of the map just kind of haphazardly. It was after I found maybe after the first one or two that I realized that they were on the map already. That the only thing on the map before you pick up those map pieces is where those are at. And as soon as like it clicked, I was like, oh, I can fill out this whole map. Like that's where they are. But I remember being really excited, like when it clicked that's how you, yeah. And I did the same thing as soon as I saw them, I beeline to a few of them.
Funny you mentioned that too, because I think I learned that literally my last playthrough with Adam. That I've done a ton of exploring in this land. I have a bunch of the save rest points, but where the hell is the map? It's like look for that little tower. There's always this little blip tower,
Mhm.
and then sure enough, big chunk of the map revealed to you. Because that was one of the things. Like when I was playing by myself, I was just looking for save points, looking for summon statues. Because if you're playing co-op, you can only bring the person along with you if you find the summon statue for that general area.
Mhm.
So, I mean, one of the times we were playing there and just Adam disappeared like the ghost from Beetlejuice. And I'm like, well, I guess, until I can figure out where this next one is, I know it's got to be near here. And it turns out it was in a mine below the ground that, you can't advance with the co-op. One drawback to playing with co-op is that it allows people to come into your world. For what do you call that, Adam? That they come in where it's not an NPC summon, but it's like
They invade you.
Yeah, the invaders basically. Yeah, I hate that shit.
Yeah.
Leave me alone. What are you doing? I'm trying to play this
Yeah.
game. I'm trying to learn. You're already clearly
Yeah.
overpowered. Go do something else. Stay away from my game.
That's a big subculture though of Elden Ring is the PvP. Once
Mhm.
everybody's done PvE and they go to the next stage, and a lot of them is for a lot of people it's the PvP portion.
Yeah.
No,
Yeah,
like,
and it's always not knowing, because you could like try to be fighting the boss multiple times, and then you try to keep getting to that boss, and like maybe on your fifth attempt to get back to that boss, you get invaded, and then they just destroy you. Or you're trying to get back to like finding your lost souls or runes or whatever you want to call them throughout the games. They have different names throughout there. I call them souls because that's what I've always called them. But like you're trying to get back to that, and then boom, there's an invader ready to take you out.
Yeah, they're all like way better than you. it never.
Yeah.
For me, like, yeah. Well, sorry, they're all better than me. Let's put it that way.
Well, I wonder. I don't know if anyone can just answer this because I'm playing with Adam and the game nerfs Adam for my world, right? I don't think it nerfs the person who's coming in from their world. Basically, I'm pretty confident, and if I'm wrong, I'm just speaking from the assumption that like I'm seeing the attack that me and Adam are doing this guy, and we're doing barely any damage to the guy, and then he just pulls out like I think there's one time we really got this one guy in the last playthrough, Adam, and then he just pulls out like some magic spinning wand, and it takes us both out with one hit. We're like, well, that was the end of this one. So yeah.
By the time I got to Dark Souls 3, it was kind of like it was fun to be invaded sometimes in Dark Souls 3. Like early when I was doing Demon Souls, because I've been invaded in Demon Souls like back in the day, and it sucks because they are always better than you. But by the time I was at Dark Souls 3, I was kind of like, this is going to go 50-50. And there were times where like I was helping somebody else, and then they got invaded. And the funny thing is when you're invading somebody, you're either you don't know how many people you're invading into. I find it hilarious when they're invading you, they're coming after you, and the next thing you know, your buddy is coming up behind them to smack them. That's happened to me in Dark Souls. I got invaded, and my friend was with me, and then he's coming up the steps, coming after me, not knowing that down around the corner, up those same steps he came out was my friend, and we just wrecked him. And then a similar situation happened, got invaded, and then this guy came in, like he looked and saw both of us, saw the gear we were wearing, and he literally just turned around and jumped off the cliff. So he could it's like,
oh, that's funny. I didn't sign up for this.
I really like the subculture of YouTubers and TikTokers that kind of cosplay the PvP. Like they had the Ninja Turtles. They were all green, and they had the different colored headbands, and they were running around doing PvP, and they had Jesus Christ. He was completely holy, and he just wrecking people. And then you had like the Sonic the Hedgehog, and he was just spinning to win.
The Jesus build is
fun.
hilarious.
I'll find the link on YouTube and I'll share it on our Twitter thread. There's this one video that I found hilarious. It was cosplay at a Comic-Con. Someone was dressed up as Solaire. And it basically was going up against like Deadpool and all these people. And he just kept rolling around on the ground as they were fighting. It was one of the funniest things.
That's hilarious.
Even the one thing about, the PvP also is that even if you're not playing co-op, you could turn it off. So there actually is no real invasions, but there still are fake. There's NPC invasions still in the game. That was something I learned while exploring the East, where I'm like, oh, sweet. All right, I'm going to go this way. And then all of a sudden comes running right out after you. No matter what, it's not just a random. It's an NPC. They're there in the game. It's like it's meant to be in there, even if you're not going to play online. So
there's quite a few of those in that game. There's probably half a dozen of them.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I like those fights. I thought they were a good little variety. I thought it added a little bit of variety. They all felt a little different than the main bosses. They all moved a little smarter. They had different kind of tarnished builds and stuff. So I like those fights. I thought they were a cool little splash of variety for sure.
I think it was also like a way to show you maybe a different build you might not be using, and you're seeing how they're fighting, and you're like kind of doing PvP, but it's against the computer. But like those NPCs, those like invasion, like those fake invaders were also in earlier Souls games. And the ones in the earlier Souls games, I believe, were sort of like tied to the story. I believe there's one of them that it's a normal NPC you run across, and I think if you don't do something, they turn into one of those. And then there's another one that you fight going up against another boss in Dark Souls that is like their protector or their guardian knight that is a protector of the boss you're headed after. So they were a little bit more story driven in like at least in the Dark Souls games. I don't know if they have much of a story purpose in Elden Ring. I would say probably not.
Right. And one of the NPCs that I felt probably could have been better. Was it the Dung Eater?
Oh yeah, the Dung Eater.
The Dung Eater. He's just had this small little storyline in the game, and my second playthrough, I made sure that I did it. I made sure that I did the big Dung Eater or whatever it is, the evil Dung Eater storyline, and it just wasn't. It wasn't. As detailed as the other ones, I guess.
Sure.
There's an actual like a something in the game that we didn't even discuss or cover. Is a factor in certain boss fights that, especially the one I'm thinking about the most as I'm looking at this list of bosses, because this is another boss I got stuck on for a little while. The Crucible Knight Ordovis. When you fight him and his companion, yes, they are brutal. And I kept saying this throughout the stream, and now that I'm reading this confirms what my theory was that entire fight, because I kept saying this. And it says right here, they hit extremely hard. Both enemies share a trigger to attack as soon as you try to heal or use something, making spacey in the small arena particularly frustrating. I kept saying that throughout stream. This confirms what I've been saying the whole time. Every time I tried to heal, they knew to hit you. Every time I try to do it all, especially the one on the horse. I forget his name. But every time I tried to use that item, hit me with fire. Just the second it went fire. Like it didn't matter what they were about to do. The second you healed, they were triggered to attack you immediately.
I remember thinking one of the Godskin fights was the same way. And I'm not 100% sure, but yeah, that is an interesting point, and it definitely adds a level of frustration without a doubt.
So Gideon, the All-Knowing, if you guys remember that fight, can be easy or it can be one of the hardest fights in the game, depending on what you do in the world and what you get. I remember my first playthrough, I tried to be as thorough as I possibly could, get as much stuff as I possibly could. That ended up making that boss fight like super hard. The second playthrough, it was a cakewalk. But I remember reading that it scales with what you do in the world and the information you give him.
Interesting. Yeah, I did not know that. I don't remember how I fared with that one. I'd have to.
Yeah, I think when you talk with him, he asks for information. You give him that information, and that makes that boss fight harder later in the game. So if you want to refrain from giving him information, so that boss fight is it's a cakewalk.
That is very interesting.
Yeah, neat mechanic.
Yeah. Jay, I know I put that list for fun facts because we were talking previously. If you have still some interesting ones that you want to read off.
No, I mean I found it interesting that the first trophy, the first boss trophy, it's like 50.2% of players got that trophy. So that means 49.8 gave up on the game and didn't play it again.
Hey, but they just announced 20 million purchases of Elden Ring, so yeah. So take that in consideration.
Yeah, well, I'm assuming that's across all
platforms.
All platforms, but
yeah, that's true. Mm-hmm. Before we wrap this up, does anyone have any final overall thoughts to say about this game?
I got something. I think it's really interesting how easy that they make it to miss very integral mechanics in the game. Two things in particular. One, the ashes. You can completely miss the ability to summon the ashes, and there are so many in the game. You have to be in the right spot at the right time without too many spoilers to even get the ability to get those, and it's really easy to miss. I mean, you can get really far into the game without even really having the ability to summon those, which I think is just really interesting. And then the other one is there's one grace that you have to hit to get the ability to level up and to get your mount. And I've watched a new player walk up to that grace, and you can discover it. You can just, you walk up to a grace and you hit it, you discover it, and then you have to hit it again to actually rest at that grace. So you can find the one grace that you need to be able to level up and get the summon. You can walk up to it and discover it, and then just walk away and not realize that you have to rest there to get the ability to use your mount.
So I was bit by that a couple times.
Yeah, I watched a new player they played for probably 2 or 3 hours before they found that grace. And then they eventually found it. And I was like, yes. They walked up to it, they discovered it, and then they continued on. And I was like, just hit it again, and then you can
that
level
happened
up.
to me. That happened to me. I did it because that was just one of those parts where I was like, no, we're just gonna keep getting our areas.
I discovered this grace. That's great. Let me move on. I don't need to rest right now. I have full HP and everything. No reason to. No problem. And it's it's obviously game changing. It's probably the most game changing grace in the game, and you can just not know that you need to hit it again. And
believe me, like I said, I'm doing this, and I'm like, where the frick is this horse?
How do I level up? I've seen people 100%,
and you see people within 5 minutes of the game riding their horse, doing double jumps and everything. Here I am exploring this land, basically everywhere, just walking around
there and grab it. Yeah.
I know. I can relate. Yeah.
And I had one other really quick thing. As somebody that played the game completely blind, I would say to new players, if you want to know the lore of the game, but you're having trouble piecing it together, one, reading every single item, you can look at the item details and it tells you the stats and what the item is. And then, there's a way to toggle, and, there's a lot of lore on each item. I missed that for a while. I literally in the menu just didn't realize that you could toggle over to a different screen. So, that's really important. I would also say if you're playing it blind and you want to know more about the lore, just watch a video. Honestly, there's a lot of really good videos out there that give you a lot of lore that don't really take away from the game. They don't give you mechanics. They don't spoil fights and stuff like that. So, I waited until I finished the game to watch a lot of the lore. And part of me kind of wishes that I watched some lore videos as I played. I would have understood what was happening a lot more. And I think there's a lot of good YouTubers out there that do a great job of just focusing on the lore and don't spoil other parts of the game, so just something to consider.
I agree with that because I actually did that with the first Dark Souls, and that's why I think like out of all the Souls games, Dark Souls 1 still to me is my favorite Souls game because of the lore, because of the bosses, and because I did do that. Watch lore videos, watch what was going on with the different bosses and like things like that as far as like how they got there and what they're trying to do. And I also love that Dark Souls 3 has some things that are connected from that, which I mean, I don't really want to spoil. If anyone you want to go back and play the old Dark Souls games, I do say watch those videos and you'll get to understand some of that. So I totally agree with you on that.
Yeah.
So where would this game rank in your all-time lists?
For all time of all games?
Sauce, probably like it's probably well low on yours, but
yeah. It's right behind Bloodborne though for me. I'll tell you that.
Yeah.
Like I said, I'll say this. I like Bloodborne, but until I knew how to play the game, I was having a miserable time with it, right? So I imagine Elden Ring is probably the same exact thing. And I'm not having a miserable time with Elden Ring. It's just I'm one of those people, I guess it's like, I don't know if it's anxiety is the correct term, and maybe it is for this. I hate not knowing where to go. Like I can stomach brutally hard games, but if I know where I'm going, there's nowhere because like I will then grind, I will find it out. Not knowing where to go is like I'm scared because I'm lost in this world and everything's hard. So at least I know where to go when I was doing that. And eventually over time you learn how to play the game, right? So I know I meant this comparison earlier about the IPAs. I've had one or two good IPAs in my life, right? I've had one or two. Not all of them are terrible. The majority are, but not. But what's it called? I've had an orange creamsicle, fantastic IPA. But that's the best way I can describe it. So I'll let you guys discuss the rest since you are all big fans of Elden Ring.
I would say, yeah, that, I mean, I understand new players coming in and saying, okay, yes, I mean, you don't know where to go. And there were moments that I didn't even know where the heck I was going. I was just running around. I'm like, where to go? There's certain areas that is very easy to miss. And it's like, you have to go like down under a cave and up along the side and then all the way up to get to the area. And there is no other way up there. So sometimes trying to figure out how to get to those areas is frustrating because you can't get there any other way. And then how are you supposed to know that it looks like you can go on the map, looks like you can go up this way, but how are you supposed to know you got to go all the way down to the bottom of the valley, go up around these rocks, go in through a cave, and then run all the way? Like, there's just so many weird. The one I'm talking about the most is like the fire volcano area in the upper part. Getting up there, I did not know how to do it. As I was playing, I actually asked one of my viewers while I was streaming, I'm like, just guide me, just get me there, please. Because I don't know how to get there.
Sure.
But I agree. In like you said, and when you're like in this world, you're like alone and scared because everything will kill you. And you don't, and that's where I guess where the difference is, because I compare it to Zelda, to where it's the same thing in some of the Zelda games. I replayed Wind Waker HD, and there were so many times I'm like, I don't know where I'm going. What the hell am I supposed to do? And same with like, Oracle of Ages, Seasons, the older Zelda games, same thing. They never held your hand or exactly told you what to do or where to go. You could run around for hours before you ever figure out what you were supposed to do, which was talk to this one person in this one town that you passed by. Like Elden Ring is kind of like that, but again, it also everything's out to kill you. It's more like, okay, well, you can run around and not, like everything's out to kill you, but it's not as hard and frustrating.
Sure. Yeah, ranking Elden Ring is tough because I kind of go back and forth with myself. I've kind of thought through this before, where I had a lot of fun with the game, but I enjoy rich narrative so much. And yes, that is there in Elden Ring, but it was really hard to find for a first time player. I've played so many RPGs where I fought back tears or just let them go, where they're that impactful and the narrative just is really deep and really hits you really hard. And I never felt that with Elden Ring. I that being said, I still had a ton of fun with it, but if I really thought about it, it would probably not make my top 10. I mean, I still had a lot of fun with it, but there's so many other for me, RPGs that are, the stories are so memorable that it's hard for me to put Elden Ring up there with it. But then I'm also at odds because I had a ton of fun with it, so it's kind of hard for me to rank in that sense. It's definitely up there for me, but I don't know that it would go, in my top 10 overall.
Yeah, I didn't even say mine at all. So like for me too, it doesn't go into my top 10 at all because like Zelda, I talk about Zelda a lot because Zelda is my favorite franchise overall. And Elden Ring isn't even my favorite Souls game. So like it wouldn't even so it would even be lower in this if we were just going by my favorite Souls games, it's actually even lower. Again, I had a ton of fun. I absolutely love the game. I'm glad you're playing through it, Sauce, and I'm enjoying now. I'm playing it more co-op with you, and I'm having a ton of fun with it. It's kind of like Skyrim. You can just jump in there, run around, and do whatever you want, and just have fun with it. Do I think Skyrim's the best game in the world? Maybe, maybe not. It still has some outdated gameplay at this point, but it's still fun, and it's just an open world to enjoy it. But yeah, it's definitely not in my top 10. It's probably not even in my top 50. But but I mean, you can see right here behind me with all the games. I mean, how am I supposed to put Elden Ring in my top 10 of everything that's here?
Well, I mean, I have at one point in time, I had 4,000 plus games, physical games, and 70 plus consoles, and I actually place Elden Ring in my top 10. It may not be the best Souls game. I kind of waft between Bloodborne and Elden Ring, and then playing the Demon Souls remaster or remake really got me back into Demon Souls again. But yeah, I probably rank it in my top 10. Is it in my top 5? That just depends on my mood with Bloodborne. Because Bloodborne is on my top 5, and I think I've got on my TikTok, I did a my top 10 of all time, and I've got Elden Ring right behind or right in front of Bloodborne. But depending on my mood, it just I would really like to see a Bloodborne in a kind of done in an Elden Ring kind of scope. You know what I mean? That to me would be like the dream game. But it ranks up there for me, and I love Chrono Trigger. I love Zelda, A Link to the Past. I love all those games, but as far as like scope and lore and atmosphere, Elden Ring scratched that itch for me, and it's in my top 10.
Yeah, see, for me, I would probably say in the past, I would say just decade, because I don't want to go too far back because I don't have to add more to this list. I would probably say in the past decade or so, I would probably say my top 3 games would be Witcher 3, Assassin's Creed Odyssey, and Dark Souls 3. Those would probably, and maybe even Bloodborne would be the fourth. Bloodborne's high up there too, because I absolutely love Bloodborne. I have the collector's box set on my shelf. I love that.
I think all of us love Bloodborne. It seems like we all just love that game. It's
Never played it.
Oh, really? You never played it?
Yeah, never played it.
Oh my goodness! Good thing it's
So
like $10.
Yeah, I have said after finishing Elden Ring, I am definitely itching for new Souls experiences. That being said, I went back and forth on whether I was going to play Dark Souls 3 or Bloodborne next, and I landed on Dark Souls 3. I bought it. I plan on playing it soon, and then after that, I am going to play Bloodborne. So I 100% going to. I was never really committed to finishing or really getting into FromSoft. Elden Ring definitely got me there. I had a great time with it, and yeah, I will play Bloodborne fairly soon.
Yeah, I'm a sucker for Lovecraftian horror, and Bloodborne really scratched that itch. But again, depending on the day, those two might swap.
I say for new Souls players, and this is going to go out to anyone who's a new Souls players as far as current and you haven't played one yet. I say Elden Ring and Bloodborne are probably the two top ones to start with now that you have a whole list of Souls games to start with. I can understand if you started off in Demon Souls and you got to see the progression, you had to learn the hard way. Now that people have a collection of Souls games, you don't have to learn the hard way. I've heard so many people say that they couldn't do any Dark Souls. They just couldn't do it. They got into Bloodborne the second they learned how to dodge roll, because Bloodborne forces you to dodge and play differently than the way the Souls games did. To where Souls games, you're always just trying to block. You're just trying to block, and you're just constantly getting wrecked. But the second you start learning a different aspect on how to play, like Bloodborne would teach you, and now even Elden Ring, you go back to those older Souls games, and it's going to click for you. You're going to be like, I'll just dodge. I'll just do this. I'll just do what I did in Bloodborne. I'll just do this. So I think it can go hand in hand. If you want a big open world game, I would say start with Elden Ring. If you want to go with something maybe a little bit less, as massive as far as world, then maybe start with Bloodborne. But I would say those two would be the top two, and then maybe trickle down to Dark Souls 3, and then just work your way back.
I would actually say, I would agree with you in the fact that Elden Ring, to me, Elden Ring, the entrance bar to Elden Ring is significantly lower than, say, even Bloodborne. We saw this last year just an explosion of streamers, casual, what we would normally call casual players hop into this hardcore this hardcore genre that we call Soulsborne, and a lot of people's first Soulsborne game will be Elden Ring, and that's I think Elden Ring is a good entrance to that genre.
I'd like to reiterate, March's game of the month will be Mario March Madness. And that means the Cartridge Club will be playing the Super Mario Bros. Trilogy for the Nintendo Entertainment System. If you're playing along or just want to discuss the games with us, make sure to let us know by using the hashtag Cartridge Club on whatever social media platform you frequent. For those of you who want to get a head start on April's game of the month, the Cartridge Club will be playing the original Tomb Raider. If you're interested in being a guest on the show, please reach out to us. We're always looking forward to having new community members on to talk about the games they love. To those of you interested in supporting the club beyond a review on the podcast app of your choice, I'd like to mention that the club is entirely funded by pledges made from members of our community. We are extremely grateful to those supporters, and if you're interested in becoming one of them, please look at how you can do so at patreon.com/Cartridge Club. Well, that's the show, everyone. So before I go, I'd like to thank our guests for being here. Adam, where can we find you online?
You can find me on Twitter, TikTok, Instagram, and Twitch. I go by Atomic Bomb 1980 on all platforms.
Thanks for being here and helping us out. Jay, where can we find you online?
Yeah, you can find me on Twitch, jhoward29. You can get my socials. Twitter be real Jesse Howard, and TikTok it just be Jesse Howard. Thanks.
Cardboard, where can we find you online?
Yeah, Twitch and Twitter primarily. I am on YouTube, Instagram, and TikTok as well, but definitely more active on Twitch and Twitter and CardboardTier everywhere.
Perfect. Thank you guys for all helping me out here. As for myself, you can find me on Twitter and Instagram with the handle of ItsRocketSauce. I'm also a part of the Cartridge Club's Discord. You can find me on there. But that's mostly where you can find me online. With that being said, that's the show, everyone, and see you night.